So continuing on from the last video, showing these cards, I'll just pick up one of them today and start to comment on this card in some kind of way. Of course, these are all very big words. I'm very interested, obviously, in the effects of a post-pandemic era. And, we're just maybe a year or less outside of the official, concentrated, and intense terrorization of a world global pandemic. Some people might argue, well, maybe we're not that terrorized and actually we're doing really well and things are kind of getting back to normal. And that was a big part of my last video, the shortest video ever, which this will not be, that the fact is that normal is completely arbitrary and that normal still has immense power on us all. And that when you wake up in the morning, just like I woke up in the morning today, I look out, I see a sunrise, this beautiful orange color coming over. I've got the set of trees on the island just next to us here, or just across the water, maybe 100 meters. And I'm laying in bed, ready to get up and not ready to get up. I'm sure you've had that feeling. You're in between. And this state in between is not just a simple notion. There's a lot of interesting theorizing about liminal space, about the border spaces, about the place in between this and that, and the logic of how this and that are in a causal relationship, right? This creates that, that creates that, and so on. And we have this whole world constructed on this kind of Newtonian, Cartesian, Western logic here. So that's where I'm speaking, is from a Westerner, modern, now postmodern person. I can't speak for the rest of the world, how their world is constructed, but I would say that is the fundamental structure, and that comes from, again, lots of study, and I'm not the only one saying that we live in that kind of world, primarily not in the in-between, but we live in the this to that. So there's always the I'm here, and how do I get to the goal over there? And we spend very little time on the in-between. And in fact, we spend even less time on thinking that the aims of life and the goal of life might actually be in between this and that. Whoa, okay, well, that's like the liminal, that's the in-between, and that's the twilight zone. So all of those words are, in a sense, metaphors for living in an apocalyptic time. And if we are in this post-pandemic era, as many says, and it seems obvious to me, if we are in this Anthropocene, and it seems obvious to me, we are in extreme times, climate change being the most obvious one that's hard to say is not happening, where we are threatening life and limb entirely. And I say we are an anthropocentric, we are Anthropocene, we are the anthropos, man who is pushing the world, at least in a good degree. We're not the only ones pushing in creation to make this kind of experience that we're having of a threat, right? Never mind that we are the anthropos pushing wars, the global potential economic collapse that is not just potential. Many experts say it already is. And so that's why I have in that sign nightmares and fantasies. The nightmares and fantasies are that which is in between the light world, right, which we live, and then the dark world, which we fall asleep in and dream in nightmares. We also, in this liminal time, as I say, when the red sky is coming before the sun, I call it, for me, now locating myself, archetypally, I can feel my being over decades of my own interior work, coming to see I live in a medium. And it has a texture, it has a beingness in between that is before the sun rises. I really like that. I also love the space and the texture of that when the sun just goes down. So in a sense, I'm saying, yes, of course I depend on the sun. Thank goodness it's here. Obviously, it's a great gift that brings so much life to Earth, but so much living in the light, as which I find the modern Western world has adopted, again, with the logics of this to that, and causal connections and linear time. We are so not well conditioned to stay in and be in the in between. Even though one of us would say, you viewers, most people, if I asked, do you like sunrise? Do you like sunsets? Well, picture, snap, snap, snap. But that's not where we live. See, we're voyeurs to this time I'm speaking about. And the time, when I say it's post-apocalyptic, is in a way we have to live in the apocalyptic that's happening. All these crises, this is another way of saying apocalyptic. The future. And the future is pressing down firm and fast and invading the present so much because we're so aware of future consequences, future threats. That's what crisis sort of is. And it becomes a post-traumatic living space where we're traumatized by the future. We're traumatized by those facts. We're traumatized by the narrative of a world deteriorating. And I have been in this myself since the 60s. Yeah, the environmental movement, the ecological movement. So I come from all these threaded ways of knowing that the collapse is always present. That means the future is actually collapsing and compressing my living experience, my everyday. So when I look out at the sunrise this morning, the phrase came to me, and I've been playing with this for a little while. You may or may not relate to it, but I'm just attempting to explain a particular time that is really no time before the sun starts ticking, clicking, before we get up. And you can see, get up, to get higher, to get more. This is this thriving, driving force that we think is the way to live. I look at the sunrise, the sky, and I have this phrase that came to me a couple of weeks ago, and luckily I have someone I've been talking to about it who reminds me, you said this, and it goes like this: I am the fire before sunrise. This came out of a late night talk after sipping a little bit of potato vodka with this friend, and that phrase really came out, not in what I would call the world of the light. It came out from the world in between. And this person was very much an artistic type person, was really in there with me and capable of reading, interpreting, resting, and sensing. And so aware when I said that statement, I am the light, which I really said, I am the fire before the sunrise. So I am living my life in a light that is not the light of this lit up world. Well, I believe that is deeply part of the artistic, shamanic, mystical path. Whether that's of any value to you, to the world, or to myself, I just want to say that there's more than one place to live. There is more than I'm in the dark, sleeping, waking up, alarm clock, light, radio goes on, welcome to the day, and and then we're penetrated by this repetitive push to go somewhere, the type of future that we're pushing, but at the same time that future is collapsing and basically saying, well, you can't actually do that, and you won't be able to do that, and eventually we will be in such deep crisis that we will have to live in this apocalyptic fire. And you can hear all kinds of metaphoric and poetic resonances with having to live in the fire, having to sit in the fire of this deep searing, a searing that takes down our egos that are hooked to that rational, logical Western worldview of domination. And up, up, up. And well, hey, if the planet Earth isn't going to work for us, let's go to the planet Mars. So you get this Elon Muskian kind of push, drive to find a place where humanity can survive. So you can see it's so humanist, this orientation that I've just spoken about of the sunrise, the sunlight, being light beings. And of course, then there's a whole group of people that I've met in my life for the last 40 years who are sun people in the spiritual new age, the light workers, they even call themselves, the light travelers. And that has a history going back not just last 40 years of people getting interested in that kind of spirituality. But the light, of course, is obviously in Middle Eastern religions. You'll see it. It's in many other religions, even of the East. There's this great notion that that light is the spirit. We come from the light, right? We come from the stars. Some say we come from the star dust. Those are people more like me. We come from the dust. And the other people say, well, no, we come from the light of the stars. We come from starlight. And so it's kind of interesting. You can just watch those who love the ascender light-based cosmologies and ontologies, and those who are a little more connected to the descent of the dust. We're the leftover of the dust. Dust to dust I will become. This great ontological reckoning, the grist of the mill of life, existence, and its vulnerability in a world of entropic decay. A lot of big words and a lot of thoughts. I'm going to just not try to, tweeze all those out in a nice logical lesson here. That's not what I do generally on my, when I do these stories on video. Thank you for watching them and participating in. So if I am the fire before the sunrise, and I can learn to live in that. See, I'm not saying it's easy to live. I do not successfully, I think, yet live in the fire before the sunrise, so that I hold, and it's not just gripping hold, it's a holding carry-ons of being carried in that fire before the light, that then as the light comes on, right? So the sun comes up and all of a sudden there's more people, there's more noise, there's more vibration, there's more machines controlling our life. So I've now moved out of my contemplative space that I love to be in, and where I feel I am, right? The fire before. So I am of that light fire before what I call capital L light. I think capital L light has become addictive. So I'm sort of repeating slightly there. Let's not do that too much. But we are really not people of this dark liminal space. And yeah, so creativity for me is essential. Rather than waking up in the day and thinking, as is typical of the light world that I've just been speaking about, and its norms of how we're supposed to function and think and process and be and perceive the world of reality, I find it a nightmare. And yet it would think the world I am one to live in is more a nightmare and scary and dark and unknown and just too many ghosts in the liminal. There's nowhere to head when you're in this liminal space, the zone. It's not about heading somewhere. And therefore, it's the zone, in the sense I'm saying, is for this artistic, creative, aesthetic life, this affective life of really living in my affect, which is feelings, which is emotions, which is sensory based, which is body based, and this recognition of where I am in all of those, what I just said, modulations, affect, feelings, emotions, and then thought, of course. But thought is not the ruler of the liminal, of this time before the light. And that's why we are products and progeny of 17th century historical enlightenment, capital E, which is very different than the Eastern notions of enlightenment, of consciousness, where we come to strip ourselves of those illusions, the Maya of this world of building and getting more and being in the light. That is not generally the positioning ontologically of the spirituality of the East, and probably of other traditions, but I'm speaking particularly of the mystical traditions that are well accepting of the nature and role of the dark, of this in-between. And this very interesting theory by Gloria Anzaldua, and you can look up her name, I'll put her down on the link, has now passed, but lived in the 80s, 90s, writing and researching in and outside of the academy, which is interesting. Again, not quite living in the light world of the academic world, the intellectual world. Didn't really make it, or although she wanted to be a great writer, she didn't care so much about, do I have to fit in? Because she was a mestiza. She was of this Indian, native, and Mexican blood and raising and culture, and mixed with the Spanish, of course, of the conquerors. And she lived in between and never really joined the white world, the white world, the light world, which wants to dominate everything and colonize. So Gloria Anzaldua writes of a very interesting notion, which I'm just starting to play with because I've not studied her work by any means, but because my partner and some other sources, I've sort of looked at it. And so I'm going to call it a little bit more feminist. It's a more animistic worldview that she has nourished and encouraged and written a lot about. And her world uses this word. So her world and the world are a way of speaking about it, but they're not totally dual like that. Her world, their world, other world. No, I mean, she's talking much more fine-tuned than that, but our language is not fine-tuned for that world. So I like how she writes in her book in English and then constantly puts in these Spanish, Mexican words. I'm not a linguist, but I know that that there's something she's doing there to continually manipulate the English lit noun-based world of description. And those descriptions become our maps for who we fill ourselves in on and become part of our identity, course, and direction. So she will use this term, which is the one I wanted to share with you just this morning, that goes with this sign. I'm going to suggest, hypothetically, so that we don't look at that sign and those words and those concepts from the light, capital L, which we have to, because in fact, there's light being shone on this, so you can actually see it and I can transmit it across the airwaves. But there's another way to look at that sign, those words, those concepts, and the ontological reality, which is somewhat partially true, at least towards those words. They may not be the only way to see the world through those words and concepts, but there's another way to look at it than through the light. So I'm going to say it's the way to look at that, those words, those realities that we're experiencing. They're terrifying in some way. They're not pretty. What's happening is to look at it, and look isn't the right term either. To see isn't the right term. You can hear it's very visual. And the looking I'm speaking about, that Anzaldua is speaking about, is not of that ilk. It is not of that light, enlightened Western type of thinking. So that aside, can't go into that in finer detail here. It would take a long squeezing to pull that out. It at least is, let's call it another lens, but again, try to get outside of just the visual lens. That this lens sees and utilizes a concept that is not just intellectual, but she uses the word conocimiento. I don't know how to pronounce that exactly. I'm not Spanish. Do not study Spanish. Conocimientos, something like that. You can read it. I'll put it down in the link. And she uses that to create, it's almost, to me, it's like a zone of happening that's underneath. It is the water we swim in. And I go, oh, she's talking about the fear matrix that I and a few others have used as a term. And basically saying that is the constructing matrix, the jelly, the juice, the womb-like container, womb-like, I said. I don't know what just happened there, but I don't know if this is a new video or I've been cut off. But I'm going to stop this video and then we'll just see if any of what I just said got recorded.